morning, everybody. Good afternoon, good evening. Let's see what we got here. Hi, everybody. We're in
Utrecht.
but at the Day Spring Conference, and I just found this out. Apparently, this show predates Spring Framework.
I think so.
That's him. So
Years.
I'm joined, of course, today by Mr. Arjen Poutsma, legendary. If you've ever used any of the Spring Framework clients, then you owe a debt of gratitude to this gentleman right here. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Arjen Poutsma. I worked on the Spring team for about 19 years. My main things I did was I created the app controller programming model. I did the HTML client, as already mentioned, so from REST template to REST client. And the last thing I did was a little bit of involvement with Spring Island.
Yeah, that's awesome.
It's mainly about what I'm specialized in was APIs, helping other teams building nice APIs too.
I mean, you're underselling yourself, I think, because everybody on the Spring team deals with APIs. You deal with APIs that are front and center and used by millions of people. It's a little in service to something that would get used eventually by the REST client, but the REST client itself, that's you, right? Like the first line of API. And that's you. You can't, and I think, I was saying this earlier, and I really think it's true. I think, so people often ask if the Spring team uses like Copilot. I don't know. I don't think a lot of us are, because by definition, these are regurgitating the code over a large corpora of
They're good at
content.
reproducing code that already exists.
Yeah, but by definition,
Exactly. What the Spring team does, what I used to do was create code that doesn't exist yet.
right,
Not really a copilot.
right. We don't write the code. If it already exists, why would we write it? So, and so I think now on this monotonous code generated garbage, the stuff you're doing, the actual artisanal stuff, really good API design, that stands out, the world of that API.
Yeah.
Really appreciate that.
Thank you.
Are you? I mean, you've got a consulting business, right? Like,
Yes.
and
I do. I started a consulting business a couple of months ago to people with a problem, open source strategy, code reviews, all that kind of thing. Basically, using my experience from working on Spring to other teams. That's
Yeah.
what I do.
I couldn't. I mean, you're really good about helping people, but and you've got this incredible series that you've been publishing on LinkedIn and your blog. And what's your blog, by the way?
And my blog is Poutsma Principles.
We'll talk about that in a second. I definitely want to talk about that. So it's POUTSMA principles.com, and great blogs. And these are sort of peering into the mind of. This music is too loud. Oh, am I still playing music in the background? Sorry. Let's try that again. Okay.
Better?
There's two. I forgot to pause the music. Let's try it again. I'll just have to cut. And we're in Utrecht, Netherlands. I'm joined by the legendary Arjen Poutsma, the one of the Spring team alumnus and all around Oracle for API design, Sage. What's that reference I gave you? Hanto. Tori, whatever the
It's Kill Bill.
the Kill Bill craftsman. The legendary, the preeminent.
So that's a shame.
Software katana, yeah. And you're an API. You build the APIs that millions and millions of people worldwide use.
Yes.
And including, we talked about it, their ad controller annotation, the whole component model, indeed, git mapping, request mapping, that thing.
Well, basically the ad controller programming model, just how that would work. Right? Because back in the day, I wrote a blog about this as well. But back in the day, we had inheritance-based Spring MVC. So if you wanted to do write a controller, you had to inherit from the controller, extract command controller, the simple form controller. You remember that thing?
Right. And then the wizard stuff.
The abstract wizard controller, which is hell. So this sort of annotation-based model replaced all that and made it a lot more flexible by just annotating, being able to annotate parameters and saying this parameter should be the payload request, or this should be some sort of form data, or so just using annotation. That's what we came up with back then. It's
Right.
20 years ago, something like that.
Oh no, well, the controller stuff that came out in 2005, right? Like
Yeah.
So that was 2000. Yeah, actually, okay, close to 20 years.
Yeah.
Actually.
26 or so, 2006 or so. Yeah.
Wow. Oh my goodness. Oh, that's actually really incredible. Like, you're right, because we had the abstract hierarchy of controllers for at the same time as the new component model for a few generations.
For a while, yeah, and then slowly all the abstract-based classes were removed.
Right.
And then MVC, the annotation-based model, was all there was. And then a couple of years later, we introduced a function-based model again.
Right.
Well, I did.
Right.
So where you have handler functions instead of the annotation functional. Again, a reaction on the annotation-based stuff, from my perspective at least.
Right. Well, you had one little intermediate step, which was at response body, right? Like being able to do rest with the controller.
Yeah, that was done in Spring 3 mostly. Yeah. We introduced, so Spring 2.5 saw the introduction of that controller, and 3 was adding more restful stuff like also path parameters, exception, status code handling, so there's a whole bunch, and also REST templates, by the way, the first HTTP client we had.
In 3.0 in 2009. So all that stuff felt like a natural extension of what you had laid down before. All the existing code continued to work.
Yeah.
But then you added new capabilities, and that's a good sign of a good design, is that you can build a foundation today.
Yeah, very true. I mean, look at the REST client, for instance. One of the things I've worked on last is actually using the exact same infrastructure as the REST template is. So there's underneath all the code that's actually sending out the HTML and HTTP stuff,
right?
And also the code doing all the Jackson conversion. That's all the same.
Oh, the message converters and all that stuff.
Yeah, it's all the same, and that's been in there. It's completely bug-free, or at least there's very little chance of bugs in there because it's been out there so long.
Right. So that's a huge win, right? This is why I don't know, before we realized the music was too loud, I was trying to make the point that I think your services, your skills, and your consulting are more invaluable, more worth every euro. There's this deluge of just AI generated drivel, you know, and that is by definition regurgitation of code seen in the wider body of code out in the ecosystem, which is not by and large very good. So having somebody who actually is a craftsperson who knows what they're doing.
Craftsperson, yeah, that's why. I mean, some people say it's the art. I don't think so, but it's definitely a craft. So trying to make something that's nice to use. That's what I try to bring to other teams as part of my consulting.
You're like an API architect, you know, like you build something that is a foundation for things to come. And 20, I mean, we're talking about things that have not changed in 20 years. I mean, no, that's not fair. The component model hasn't changed.
No.
But the behind the scenes, I remember, you know.
A lot of things have changed, but I mean, the basic ideas are still there, and those are still working the same.
Yeah.
And that's also, I mean, that's so back in the day we had the DDPC template, and then we had obviously REST template, and they all both followed the same sort of design, right? Like you have one God class which does everything, and you have a whole bunch of methods on there.
Yeah.
And now we see with REST client, also web client, and also with JDBC client.
Right, and the check client.
Exactly, so you see more of a there, right? Domain-specific language, which actually sort of forces your way through the API rather than having to read up everything in the documentation. You can just control space your way through effectively,
right?
And that will give you a usable result. And that's also all topic on my blog again. I published a lot of stuff about fluent APIs and how to reduce choice, how to make sure people, when they do control space, they don't list, and then maybe another step where there's a lot of lists.
It's shorter still.
To make some sort of a state graph in between all these steps,
right.
Saying, okay, well, I'm in this state, now I can go to that state, and that's all expressed in your API. But the end result is obviously trying to make something that's very nice to use.
And you've done it. I mean, again, it's one of those things where I don't worry about those things. I just inject them. Even you could like the use of the builder so all the clients now, you have a builder you inject, and then you can call that to factor the actual thing. That's just one of those things that we just do it across the ecosystem, across the entire portfolio of projects.
But that's a lesson we learned, right? I mean, because eventually we had the REST template, and the REST template didn't have a builder, and then they did a builder, right? And the boot did a builder. Yeah. But then you had the weird fact of that it was in boot, and now the builder and the client are all in the same jar, more or less, and that's how it should be.
Yeah, quite nice.
So you live and learn, right? That's obviously also in regards to just comparing the REST template with the REST clients themselves, right? The REST template again has these enormous amount of methods with all kinds of multiple parameters. Some of them are optional, some of them are not. Know how to use it.
Yeah.
Whereas with a good DSL, with a good Fluent API, you're just forced into the good usage.
So the templates were a good idea when they first debuted. I quite like them for the the JDBC client. The template, JDBC template was like the gateway drug, right?
Yeah.
Who didn't start?
No, that was.
It's immediate utility, and then the REST template, same thing.
And you could use it. You can without the container, right? That was sort of.
Yep.
That we could advertise saying, well, just start using the JDBC template, and then go from there.
And it is really good. It takes the JDBC, and for JMS they kind of tried to make it more pleasant.
Yeah.
But before it used to be message listener containers plus JMS template is the only way I can work with JMS. JDBC has not gotten all that much more pleasant. They have auto closable now, but still. And now the client, right? And so and I think that's a good thing. It's been a symbiotic relationship. There's not really any need to modernize those low level driver level APIs because we have such nice elegant APIs above that make it work. Okay, so you today, you've got these blogs. I've been reading them. You've been linking to them on LinkedIn. Go to Pouts- This is where people can find out more about you. First of all,
yeah, that's where I base my main website, where I have a bit of a contact page as well. If you're interested in my services, I put a lot of knowledge in there, basically articles about writing APIs. Just did a whole series about Fluent APIs, like I said. But I also wrote about, about for instance between the method as prefix to.
Oh.
So if you have as a prefix, so as map, for instance, that sort of implies a view where it's connected to the original. If you change the view, or you can't change view, but if you change the relative, you just change original. Whereas with a to, you're converting to something new altogether, and there's no connection.
I didn't even think about it. I haven't read that blog yet.
Look in the DDK, it's all there, right? APIs, they use that same pattern, but it's
the good ones, the Joda time ones.
Not the old one. No.
Okay.
No, the new ones.
Yeah.
They use that. Yeah.
That's awesome. I haven't read that installment. I will. So again, Poutsma-principles.com. What are the Poutsma principles?
Oh, yes. Well, this started out as a joke. There's another blog about this as well. But the short version is that Mark Fisher did a presentation on Spring integration back in 2008-ish. It's a long time ago again.
Yeah.
And I was in the audience, and I'm a Dutchman, so I'm a blunt person. I'm very direct. And I raised my hand saying, I don't really get it. And that means it's wrong. Because I'm a Spring developer, and I was listening to a presentation about something that should easily be understandable for me.
Right.
And then what happened there was that Mark and I worked together on fixing these issues. Get my blog if you want to. And in the end, he said something to the effect of Spring integration now conforms to the Poutsma principle because I understood it.
Yeah.
So that's how the joke started. And when looking for a company name, this seemed applicable. And it's also sort of an in-joke within the Spring team, or it used to be at least.
Yeah.
When there's a whole bunch of these rules that I had when I worked on the Spring framework itself. And most of these rules are now making themselves into blog entries. So
nice.
Again, if you read up on my blog, you'll know all of those principles. But yeah, there's one explaining the exact origin if you want to know more.
So and I think that's so valuable because again, one of the big things that I love about Spring is that I know Spring framework. That gives me purchase. It gives me entry. It gives me currency in other domains. So I want to do NoSQL and data. Okay, but I don't have to learn a new component model. I've already got that. I've got the tools, the tool chain, the
It's a consistent approach, right? You have what you see is that we have a lot of these annotation-based models over everywhere, similar to at controller. Messages, dealing all kinds of stuff. No need, not only HTTP.
Yeah.
And you have
RSocket.
JDBC templates, or sorry, JDBC client versus REST client is another consistency, right? So you have a lot of ways that Spring is consistent with itself, and one of them is that you have a similar approach that works everywhere.
But I mean, to keep that over the span of decades is, people don't appreciate just how crazy difficult that is. And we've done I mean, like we had the templates, we still have templates, you can still use them, but there's now increasingly more and more clients, which I think are more utility and I think more valuable these days. But even there, like the message listener container idiom, it's all over the place, right? If you're doing any kind of messaging, we have Spring for Apache Kafka, Spring for MP, Spring, whatever, all these different modules. And so you're one of those people that did that, right? Actually created these consistent idioms that stood the test of time. What's the thing on which you sort of most struggled, and separately, what's the thing on which for which you're most proud, or of which you're most proud, I suppose is the right proposition.
That's a good question.
Maybe they're the same.
Struggled is definitely the multi. So that's a something that can parse an incoming stream of bytes as a multi-part stream. So if you form post something, and that was reactive is difficult. It was also all kinds of buffering and but it took me a long time to do that. Nobody, if it worked well, you didn't even notice.
Right.
So that's difficult. Definitely the most difficult thing I have written. What I'm the most proud of, I think, is probably the handler function and router function stuff. So I guess the second web framework I did for Spring. So one of the things I never liked about Spring MVC with annotations is the fact that it was very this works. And then you get into the downside as well, because of the way Java annotations work, they're only data. There's no behavior in there, right? It's only data. So the way that these annotations work is that you cannot really, the way that the data is given and the place where this data is handled are completely different places. And that's, in a way, the sort of the frustration, I think, that people annotation data, and the way the code where it is interpreted is somewhere completely different. And if you want to override that, you have to really know a lot more about the internals of Spring.
Right.
You can do it, but it's more difficult. There's a big gap, basically. So the standard user like this, and then it goes up. With the handler framework, my goal was really to make something that's one downside. The annotation. The other thing I want to mention, because it has to be in these annotations,
right?
Because there's no way to extend annotations. There's no way to override behavior. It's all meaning that if we want to add new functionality to Spring MVC, the Spring people have to do it effectively.
Right.
Now with the functional stuff, everything's a function, right? All the predicates, all the handling code, everything's a function. So, and if you don't like the function, you can write the barrier between using it as default and then extending it is much more smooth, if you know what I mean.
Right.
There's a very smooth
linear
curve there, whereas with annotations, like I use annotations, I want to change the default behavior, boom.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm most proud of, because it's effectively very small. It's just a couple of interfaces, and it's very powerful. You could do, and it's functionality. You don't have to ask the Spring team. You can just add it yourself as a function.
I mean, so good frameworks are open for extension but closed for modification, right? So, I mean, you did meet people. It used to be that there was like annotations and then nothing. So either the annotations worked and then nothing, and then eventually you did provide it wouldn't. You provide.
Having your own annotation handler, so you could always basically provide your own annotation, and write your own code to handle that as an argument for
No.
a controller, for instance.
Right, but I'm talking about like request
Right.
parameters that are actually
Yeah.
part of Spring MVC component model.
Right. Yeah.
But even that still, it's still more of a hockey puck than it is a linear
Yeah.
evolution in logic. But and then you're right. Function.
Yeah.
Active style.
Yeah.
Then we got functional react. Then we got functional servlet
Yeah.
style or whatever. I don't know.
Yeah.
Right. And they're if you're staring at it, you almost wouldn't even know, especially if you're just using lambdas.
One uses mono and flux, the other doesn't.
Yeah, but if you're just
but they're pretty much the same.
Yeah, if you're returning
Same
a
with
server,
web client and REST client.
if you're returning a server response with some result from a Spring Data repository,
Yeah.
you don't even know that the repository is returning my own from the code. So it's possible to look at either and not realize you're using one or the other. It's a really good, well done design, even though they work well in either the reactive context or in the servlet blocking imperative IO context. So I love those APIs. That is so flexible, in fact, that Spring Cloud Gateway, when we ported Spring Cloud Gateway to MVC, it just hooks into that.
Yeah. Spring GraphQL also used. So I see the part about being a framework developer that your code will be used in ways that you didn't expect.
Right.
If you did it right anyway, right? I mean, effectively, what you're doing is building Lego blocks, like really small blocks. Where the boot team, they're a bit higher. They're making whole Lego sets. And the framework just made little blocks. And then, obviously, as a consequence, people will use it in ways that you didn't expect it from. And that's really nice always to see. So, yeah, it's useful internally. It's suitable for within your library to create a sort of a web facet, to create a little programmatic way of living a web interface.
Right.
Much more suitable for that, I would say, than annotations are.
I'm a huge fan of the functional reactive style. There's the other thing is that expands the ecosystem, that expands the Spring universe for people, right? Because if you come to Spring, you've got we used to have now we have the controller component model, which I love, and that's fine. If all you've ever known is Spring, then that's going to feel great. But if you're coming from the Node world or Sinatra and Ruby and whatever, or even Spark.java, there's a bunch of others.
If you're using Kotlin, basically, if you're using a Kotlin DSLs for Spring, you're effectively using that same framework because it seems to be, from my outside perspective, it seems to be Kotlin is less annotation happy than Java is. So that's why in our Kotlin version, we actually have a nice Kotlin DSL for creating these routes, which is really quite powerful. You can do a lot more in Kotlin than you can do in Java.
Right.
In that respect.
So having that functional style means that it doesn't matter where you're coming from, we have something for you, right? And behind those initial Spring MVC plumbing, right?
Yeah, they all use message converters and dispatcher servlet and all kinds of stuff.
Cool.
Yeah, it's all the same.
So would you say the functional style is a view on top of Spring MVC's foundational layer, or is it an adapter?
Depends on what you mean with Spring MVC, but if you mean the end of Spring MVC, obviously means a lot of things.
The dispatcher servlet above that, but below the.
If you look at it the way it's implemented, they're basically handler
request, whatever.
Handler resolver adapter and a handler mappings. Effectively, that's what they both implement. And what Spring MVC does is basically it has a couple of those. One of them is applicable to controllers. One of them is applicable to these handler functions.
Which is the fact that you forgot the name.
Yeah,
makes you so happy. A little thing, and the oldest of Spring MVC uses is how your requests got plugged into the server.
Yeah, you had to explicitly wire everything up, right? Back in the day. So,
exactly.
You had to remember that. Beam URL name mapping and all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
So I'm so glad you forgot it, because if you forgot, then I don't feel bad about forgetting it myself. Why did you join the Spring team? I always wonder why people like you who could do anything decided to help the Spring.
When I joined, Spring wasn't as big as it is now. So I was working for a Dutch consultancy company, and basically one of the people there was involved with Interface 21, Alef Arendsen.
Oh yeah.
And I was hired there actually, and they asked me what I thought about Spring.
Oh no.
It was 2004. So yeah, it's just a bunch of tricks with XML. It's not really big. And that actually got me hired.
Okay.
Interesting enough, because it's sort of because for one thing back then it was
Yeah.
right? And it's also, I mean, you don't want to be intimidated a little by it. It still is in a way. It's just
Yeah.
as what's going on. Especially back then, it was a lot easier to do that for sure. But yeah, that's what's got me hired, and I always had the dream of working as a library developer or as a framework developer for some reason. Back in the start of my career, which was in the 90s, I did C++, and there was a company called Rogue Wave. They had not Rogue Wave, maybe it was Rogue Software, I don't know.
Okay.
So they had these standard C++ libraries, and I was really thinking, oh, this is going to be my dream to create one of those.
Okay.
And then I joined the Spring team, and my dream came out more or less.
Nice. And so, you did C++ in the beginning.
Yeah.
Did you ever get to the point where you felt fluent? That's not the same thing as feeling comfortable.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I guess. Comfortable
Um,
enough. I mean, not as comfortable as I'm now with Java, but yeah.
Because of you're doing that before they had smart pointers and all that stuff. So I
did COM programming, Windows. That's terrible. So yeah.
COM.
Yeah, that's terrible. Yeah. Easier way, but back then it was all applets and stuff, right? I mean, I remember still writing stuff in Java 1.0.
Yeah.
And it was just a fun language. And then around the year 2000, that changed, right? Java EE came along, Tomcat came along,
J2E, yeah.
JV2E came along, yeah.
And J Servlet, or no, Tomcat wasn't called Tomcat. It was Jasper, and it was something else. It was all that. So I guess what I'm trying to get at is you came from C++. The Gang of Four book was already out before that, and we already understood conceptually the idea of design patterns, but having to manage memory and having to manage the escape of memory really cramps what you can do. Like you can write a design pattern in Smalltalk. It isn't just as soon as you start getting really abstract, things escape, they leak, and so C++.
Well, we saw a lot more of that when we did Netty stuff, when you had a lot of leaks as well, memory leaks,
right?
And our memories, but that's not what you mean, I think.
No,
I see your point. I mean, every language has a sort of idiomatic way of doing things,
sure.
Right? So what you would do in C++ and C is definitely not something be as simple as using a I prefix for your interfaces, right? That's something that's very common, for instance, in the .NET world,
right?
Whereas in Java, we see it in Eclipse, I guess. So that's about the only place you can see it. So,
right.
And you could say, well, that doesn't really matter that much to me, but for me, those kind of details are really what makes a API for framework or anything nice to use.
Yeah.
So you as well, using Java code, you wanted to use formulas or use structures that are also in the GDK, for instance. You don't want them to reinvent everything, so it looks more like a C++ API.
With a new string for every project?
Exactly, or an ASCII string class or whatever. I've seen that kind of stuff. But yeah, that's really, it's really important that you try to write and look at the GDK, saying how do they solve things. I can do the same. If you're using Kotlin, you can look at the Kotlin sources saying, well, it's idiomatic. How do I write idiomatic code in this language?
Well, so that, yes. And to that end, I sort of wonder, did your ability to think about bigger and more ambitious designs improve to Java? Because you're talking about things like memory management. I mean, I think that's sort of like, you ever watch that anime Dragon Ball Z?
Yeah.
Where the fighters are like fighting and they're carrying weighted clothes, and then they actually have to cut loose.
And obviously, Java is a lot more productive, but in a way, you'd never lose that. I think you don't consider it, but you still, for instance, I still think whatever I do, I still think about what because there's so many abstractions on top of that you tend to forget about what actually happened. So for me, it's always very important saying, okay, well, we're doing this, we're doing the web service, we're doing JSON. What are we actually sending? What does it look like, right?
Who knows?
And that's important.
Yeah.
And the same thing applies here, I think. So yeah,
100%.
yeah.
What's the next big thing for you? By the way, did you ever actually? Let me backtrack. Did you ever think about going to .NET? Speaking
I
of?
did do .NET, so
Oh, yeah.
I went to .NET and I came back.
Okay, how'd you find it? Nice people.
No,
Good food?
Well, I think what's mainly difference is between the Java space and the .NET space. Well, this was 20 years ago again. This was before I joined Spring
Right.
Spring team, shortly before. But they are less open, or it used to be at least, less open to open source, much more looking at Microsoft, what they do, and expecting something from them.
Right.
And besides that, I mean, C# in a way was always a better Java. That's what I found appealing. I know that these days they split a lot, but exactly a better Java
For sure.
And now they are completely diverged. So I can't really talk about the .NET space these days.
Well, I mean, I know, like, I follow. C# is still a better Java, but to be fair, Java doesn't want all those features.
No.
So, you know,
Java is the better Java.
Yeah, Java has gotten a lot better anyway, and we have Kotlin as well. So
yeah,
whatever. So, your headspace around these days? Are you looking for like projects working on helping people modernize APIs?
Exactly. I'm working on helping various customers on their APIs, reviewing their code, all that kind of. That's where I'm at. Also, really enjoying writing these blogs. Get a nice feedback from them, so that's really appealing. I might even consider putting.
Publish. Talk to me. I like.
Okay.
Trust me. That's
I got my publish already.
Right. Yeah. Well,
how many? What's your percentage?
Nothing. It's open source. I have a project you can use. I want you to self-publish because trust me, it's too good and it'll go. That book would go far.
Yeah.
So you should definitely be 100%.
Yeah. So if what I said sounds appealing to you, then by all means contact me.
Yeah.
Follow. So yeah.
I
like helping teams with these kind of problems that we talked about.
I love your blogs. I'm just gonna tell you right now. I'm gonna be honest with you as a friend. I'm a little annoyed that you started writing them after. Like all those years I worked with you, and I would have begged for a drop of your wisdom, and now the blogs are coming. I love those blogs. They.
Thank you.
No, thank you. That's what I'm trying to say. Thank you. Thanks everybody for hanging out. We're actually at
George has a talk in 20 minutes.
Yeah, I gotta go
do his magic.
Do my thing. Yeah. Thank you, my friend.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Good to see you again. Bye-bye.
Bye.